August 1590, a ship cut through the heavy waters of the Outer Banks. On board was John White, a man returning home after 3 long years of silence. He stepped onto Roanoke Island expecting life. He expected noise. He expected movement. He expected to hear his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. But what he found was nothing. Silence. Heavy. Unnatural. Complete. The settlement he built was still standing, but it felt wrong. No smoke from fires. No voices. No people. 115 men, women, and children had vanished. Without a trace, White searched the fort. No bodies. No blood. No signs of panic. It was as if the entire colony had simply disappeared. But the strangest part was not what was missing. It was what remained. The houses were not destroyed. They were carefully taken apart. Not burned. Not attacked. Dismantled with purpose. As if the people who lived here planned to leave. Then White saw the first message carved into a tree, asterisk inside the settlement, and deeper inside the settlement, another word that would haunt history for centuries. Some called it a curse. Some called it an abduction. Some called it a massacre. But none of it explained what really happened here, because there were no signs of war. No estimate of escape and panic, only silence, and a word no one could fully understand. For over 400 years, Roanoke has been called America's greatest disappearance, a colony that simply vanished, but that is not the only story. Hidden beneath history is another clue, one that was not found in the forest, but on a map drawn by John White himself. And what that map reveals suggests something no one expected. The colony may not have been lost. It may have gone somewhere else entirely. And the truth of Roanoke begins where history stopped looking. The 1587 expedition was never meant to land at Roanoke. That was not the plan. John White and his 115 settlers were supposed to reach the Chesapeake Bay, a place with fertile land, a place for survival. But they never got there. As the ships neared the coast, everything changed. The navigator in charge, Simon Fernandez. History would later call him the Swine. He refused to sail any further. No warning, no debate. Just a decision. The colonists were forced to land at Roanoke Island, the very same place where an earlier English outpost had already failed, a place marked by tension and blood. They were dropped into a hostile land with no time to prepare and no way to turn back. From the very beginning, survival was uncertain. Within weeks, that uncertainty turned into fear. Food was running out, tension with local tribes was rising, and winter was approaching fast. The colonists made a desperate decision. John White had returned to England for supplies. He did not want to leave, but he had no choice. As he sailed away, he looked back at the shoreline. His daughter was there. His newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dare, was there. 115 lives were left behind him. He promised he would return for 6 months. He believed it, but I was wrong, because across the Atlantic, a war was beginning. The Spanish Armada, a massive fleet. And England was preparing for its own survival. Queen Elizabeth ordered all ships to be taken for war. The ocean itself became a barrier. White was trapped in England. Days turned into months. Months turned into years. 3 full years passed, and Roanoke was forgotten by the world, but not by White. Every day, he waited. Every delay was a silent death sentence. When he finally returned in 1590, nothing was as expected. The settlement still stood, but it was empty. No bodies. No struggle. No fire. The houses were not destroyed. They had been carefully taken apart. As if the people had planned to leave, inside the settlement he found buried supplies, but many were gone. His belongings were damaged, his books destroyed by the weather. But the most important clue was not destruction. It was absence. There was no Maltese cross. The agreed distress signal. Only one word remained, asterisk. For centuries, historians called it a mystery, a disappearance, a ghost story. But modern White's Rexer suggests something different, something hidden on a map he drew himself. There may be a concealed clue. A location that changes everything, and it raises one dangerous question. Did the colony vanish, or was it moved on purpose? To understand what happened to the colony, we have to go back before their arrival. Because Roanoke was already broken. 2 years earlier, another English group had been sent there, led by Ralph Lane. His mission was not survival. It was control. When food ran low and tensions rose, Lane did not negotiate. He set a trap and killed the local leader, Wingina. That moment changed everything. because from that point on, the English were no longer seen as explorers. They were seen as a threat, a danger to survival itself. So, when the 1587 settlers arrived, they were not entering empty land, they were entering fear. And that fear explains everything John White found in 1590. The word CROATOAN. No sign of struggle, no Maltese cross, no warning of distress. Only a direction, a destination. CROATOAN was not a cry for help, it was a decision. But history did not stop there. For centuries, the story ended in confusion, until modern science reopened the case. In 2012, researchers returned to John White's map, a watercolor document known as La Virginia Pars. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but hidden beneath two patches of paper was something else. Using X-ray and infrared imaging, they uncovered a symbol, a four-pointed star, the mark of a fort, not on the coast, but 50 miles inland. At the meeting point of two rivers, the Roanoke and the CROATOAN. This changed everything. It meant the colony did not disappear. It may have moved, on purpose, and so the search shifted from the island to the forest, to a place now known as Site X, and what they found there was only the beginning. At Site X and nearby Site Y, archaeologists did not find treasure. They found something far more important, evidence of everyday life, broken pottery, green-glazed English borderware, objects from the late 1500s. But the most important clue was what was missing. There were no clay tobacco pipes, and that matters, because tobacco pipes became common only after Jamestown in 1607. Their absence means one thing: this settlement predated Jamestown and belonged to the 1587 colonists. This was not a myth, it was physical proof. But the story did not end in the forest. On Hatteras Island, another discovery emerged. Tiny fragments of iron, known as hammer scale. These are created only in blacksmith forges, and blacksmithing was not native to the region at that time. This meant something extraordinary. English metalworkers were living there. Not briefly, but long enough to leave industrial traces. Even more surprising, English artifacts were found alongside native pottery. Not separated, but mixed. This suggests something rare in colonial history, not destruction, but integration, a merging of two worlds. Centuries later, the story appears again. In 1701, explorer John Lawson recorded something unusual. Native people with gray eyes, and oral traditions of ancestors who could talk out of a book, a direct reference to English literacy. Modern science has added another layer through the Lost Colony DNA project. Genetic traces today match surnames from the original 1587 manifest, including families like Brown. The colony was not erased. It evolved. It survived. But if the evidence is so widespread, why was it called a mystery for 400 years? Part of the answer lies not in history, but in storytelling. In the 1930s, tourism campaigns reshaped Roanoke into a ghost story, a mystery with no solution, because mystery sells. But there was another reason. As long as the colony remained lost, land claims tied to Roanoke remained legally useful for the English crown. So, the disappearance was not just history, it became strategy, a silence maintained for centuries. And behind that silence was not a vanished colony, but a forgotten one. Roanoke was never just a disappearance, it was a message, but for centuries, no one understood it. While historians searched for ruins, the land was quietly telling a different story. In recent excavations from 2024 and 2025, something unexpected was found on Hatteras Island, the land once known as CROATOAN territory. Archaeologists uncovered cohabitation sites, not battlefields, not mass graves, but shared living spaces. English tools and Native American pottery found together in the same soil layers. This was not evidence of conflict. It was evidence of coexistence. Two worlds, living side by side. Then came another clue from history. In 1701, explorer John Lawson documented something strange. Native communities with gray eyes, and memories passed down through generations. They spoke of ancestors who could talk out of a book, a clear reference to English literacy. A memory that survived over 100 years. Not in documents, but in people, and in their appearance. But the real question is not what was found. It is what it means. Because the evidence points to something no one expected. The colony did not vanish, it changed, it adapted, it survived. The 115 settlers did not disappear into history, they disappeared into identity. They left behind their fort, their structure, their rigid English world, and entered something entirely different, a life woven into the land and into the people already living there. But if this is true, then the question becomes darker. Why was this not the story we were told? Why did history choose lost instead of merged? Because Roanoke does not fit the traditional story of conquest. It breaks it. It replaces disappearance with integration. And that creates a problem for how origin stories are written. Because if Roanoke was not a tragedy, but a transformation, then what else have we misunderstood about the beginning of America? And that question still has no final answer.
The Roanoke mystery did not survive because evidence was missing. It survived because the story was controlled. For Sir Walter Raleigh, the colony was more valuable as a disappearance than as a confirmed survival. Because under Queen Elizabeth's charter, his claim to the New World depended on one thing: an active English presence. If the colony was proven dead or absorbed into native society, that claim could collapse. So, the story had to remain unfinished. Meanwhile, John White waited in silence while Raleigh moved on to other ambitions, searching for wealth and new territories. Roanoke became less important, and the mystery became useful. By 1597, even the family name was being legally erased. John Dare, Virginia Dare's brother, had to officially declare his father dead, not because they knew what happened, but because they needed closure on paper. The colony was no longer a mission, it was a legal formality, and over time, it became a legend. Centuries later, the story changed again. In the 1930s, Roanoke was rebranded not as history, but as mystery. A tourist attraction built on uncertainty. A story where disappearance sold better than survival. But beneath the legend, the evidence tells a different story. At Site X and Hatteras Island, archaeologists found something unexpected, not destruction but connection. English tools, native artifacts, shared spaces, signs of cooperation instead of conflict. This breaks the traditional version of colonial history, the idea of fixed sides, of simple outcomes, of total loss or total victory. Because what happened here does not fit those categories. It suggests something more human. When the English crown disappeared from their lives, a new reality formed, not built on control but on survival, an adaptation. Two worlds learning to exist together. The colony did not simply vanish, it transformed. The settlers abandoned their old identity and stepped into a new one, a shared existence in a land that demanded change. The gray eyes recorded in later accounts and the iron traces buried in the soil are not signs of extinction. They are signs of continuity. So, maybe Roanoke was never a failure. Maybe it was the beginning of something else. Because if you remove the myth of disappearance, what remains is not a ghost story. It is a human story. Of the first people who stopped being just English and became something new. Something that would later be called American. And for 400 years, we may have been searching for the wrong ending. If the evidence of survival is so strong, then why does the vanishing story still exist? Because the truth is harder than the myth. A mystery is easy to accept, but a human reality is not. For centuries, we chose the easier version. Ghost stories, abductions, curses, entire theories built on the idea of disappearance. Because if they vanished, we don't have to ask what really happened. But if they survived, then the story becomes something else entirely. Something more uncomfortable, something more human. Roanoke was not just a colony, it was part of an empire. An empire built on fear, fear of the unknown, fear of the other, fear used as justification for control. The settlers were told a story, that the land was dangerous, that the people were savage, that survival required domination. But that story began to collapse when the crown was no longer present, when survival became real, not political, not ideological, but personal. In that moment, something changed. The settlers saw what was in front of them, not monsters, not enemies, but people, and slowly the old identity faded. What replaced it was not conquest, but cooperation. Not empire, but adaptation. That is why Roanoke is not a simple disappearance. It is a contradiction in history. A moment when the script broke, when people stopped following the story they were given and started living a different one. The gray eyes remembered in later generations, the artifacts buried in the soil, the shared spaces between cultures, all point to one reality. This was not extinction, it was transformation. A group of people who were told to survive at any cost, and chose to survive by becoming something new. So, maybe Roanoke was never lost. Maybe it was simply misunderstood, not a tragedy of disappearance. But the beginning of some stories we are still trying to understand, because the most powerful stories in history are not the ones that end. They are the ones that change us. And Roanoke may be one of those stories. Even as archaeology continues to uncover evidence, one final mystery remains, not in the soil, but in our imagination. In 1937, a series of carved stones appeared, known as the Dare Stones. They claimed to be messages from Eleanor Dare, final words from the Lost Colony, but they were later exposed as hoaxes. Still, they changed everything. Because they appeared at the perfect moment, just as the Outer Banks was being rebranded, not as history, but as mystery. A story of disappearance, a story that sold, and it worked. For nearly a century, the idea of Roanoke became something bigger than history. It became myth, a ghost story, the Atlantis of America, because mystery is easier to believe than reality. But that mystery comes with a cost. It keeps the past at a safe distance. If they vanished, we don't have to ask what happened next. But if they survived, then everything changes, because they are no longer strangers in history. They become part of us. Modern research has begun to close that distance. Excavations in 2024 and 2025 revealed clear signs of shared settlement, English artifacts, native materials, living spaces built together, and even more revealing, genetic studies. The Lost Colony DNA Project has identified living descendants today, carrying markers traced back to the 1587 settlers, names that once existed only on a ship manifest, now found in modern family lines. This changes everything. Because it means the story did not end. It continued. The 115 settlers did not vanish. They adapted, they survived. They became part of something larger than the colony itself. Not conquest, not extinction, but continuation. So, Roanoke was never a disappearance. It was a transformation. A moment where history stopped following the script, and real people made real choices to survive. We spent 400 years searching for a lost colony. But what we actually found was something far more human. A group of people who faced collapse and chose connection instead. We were not looking for ghosts. We were looking for ourselves. And now, the mystery is no longer about where they went. It is about how we misunderstood them for so long. The secret of the map may go deeper than paper. Beneath La Virginia Pars, researchers found something unexpected, signs that suggest hidden layers, possibly even invisible ink, materials like lemon juice or milk, substances that only reveal themselves under heat. If true, this was not just a map, it was a coded message, a document designed to hide survival itself, not from nature but from people. This changes everything we thought we knew about John White. Because this was not standard cartography, this was secrecy, desperation, protection. The survival of his family may have depended on silence, not exposure, and that shifts the entire story, because Roanoke was never just about land. It was about control. When White left, the Watcher was gone, and everything changed. The settlers were no longer under the structure of the empire, no longer bound by hierarchy, no longer shaped by propaganda alone. The ideas they were taught in England began to break down. The belief that the land was hostile, that the people were enemies, that survival required domination, none of it held in real life, because survival has its own logic. And that logic is human. Trade replaced fear, gifts replaced suspicion, and slowly connection replaced conflict. Roanoke stopped being an extension of an empire and became something else, a place of adaptation, of survival, of choice. The settlers were no longer just colonists. They were individuals making decisions in real time, not soldiers of a system, but people responding to reality. And that is where the story becomes uncomfortable for history. Because it suggests the machine of empire was not absolute, it could be abandoned, rewritten, rejected, and if that is true, then Roanoke is not just a historical mystery. It is a challenge to everything we think we know about the beginning of colonial America. Because if the first chapter was not pure conquest, but something closer to coexistence, then what else in our history is still hidden behind carefully placed silence? What other truths are still waiting for the right light to reveal them? The final layer of the Roanoke mystery may not be a disappearance at all. but a misunderstanding. For 400 years, we chose the version that made more sense to us, a story of vanishing, a story of loss, a story of ghosts. Because that version is easier to accept, but the evidence tells a different story. The map found in the British Museum shows something hidden beneath the surface, a marked location, a fort symbol 50 miles inland. At what we now call Site X, and traces of possible invisible ink suggest something even more deliberate. Not confusion, but intention. John White may have known exactly where the colony was going. He did not lose them. He may have protected them by hiding the truth, not from nature but from empire, because in that world, location was power, and survival depended on secrecy. Over time, the story changed, from relocation to mystery, from survival to disappearance, but the ground tells a different truth. At Hatteras Island and Site X, archaeology has revealed signs of shared life, hammer scale, tools, living spaces. Evidence of cooperation between English settlers and the Croatan people. Not destruction, not extinction, but integration. A merging of lives, a merging of worlds. The 115 settlers did not vanish. They adapted. They survived. They became part of something new, a beginning instead of an ending. And that is why the story was never simple. Because it challenges the idea of failure. It challenges the idea of conquest. It challenges the idea of separation. For centuries we called them lost because we could not imagine a different outcome. But modern evidence suggests something far more human. They did not disappear into history. They stepped into it. Sir Walter Raleigh kept the mystery alive for political reasons. Later generations turned it into myth, and tourism turned it into legend. But beneath all of that, the truth remains. Roanoke was not the end of a colony. It was the beginning of something new, a group of people who were told they would vanish, and instead chose to survive by becoming something else entirely. So maybe the real mystery was never where they went. But why we needed them to be lost in the first place? Because once you remove the myth, what remains is not a tragedy, it is a transformation. And the first chapter of America was not written in disappearance.
It was written in adaptation.